Hi, everybody. Welcome to our mental health panel discussion that goes along with The Lightning Thief, the Percy Jackson Musical at Laguna Playhouse. Today, we're going to be discussing the effects of learning differences on the mental health of adolescents and young adults. We have some great panelists with us today. Why don't we start off by introducing yourselves? First of all, I'm Joe Alanis. I'm the Director of Education at Laguna Playhouse, and I'm also the director of the show that we're going to be talking a little bit about today. So why don't we go ahead and introduce ourselves, the rest of you?
Okay, I suppose I'll start. Hi, I'm Dane Hobrecht. I'm playing Percy Jackson in The Lightning Thief at the Laguna Beach Playhouse.
My name is Woodrow. I am the assistant director of Laguna Playhouse's production of The Lightning Thief musical.
My name is Melinda Gillinger, and I am a special education consultant.
And I'm Dr. Dallas Stout on the faculty at California State University Fullerton Department of Child and Adolescent Studies.
Great. Dane is going to be a Cal State Fullerton student coming up soon. Isn't that right, Dane?
We have a very good theater department.
Yeah, looks great.
So just before we start off, so a learning disability is a neurologically based processing problem that may impair an individual's ability to listen, think, speak, write, read, spell, and do math. In addition to interfering with basic learning skills, a learning difference may also interfere with higher level learning skills, including organization, long or short-term memory, attention, impulsivity, and time management. And these are some things that get brought up in the show and also in the books, the Percy Jackson books specifically. So I just wanted to start with, as far as the Lightning Thief goes, how do we see the learning differences and disabilities reflected in the Lightning Thief? Do one of you performers and or director want to speak on that?
Sure. I would say mostly implicitly. Percy's in particular are only like briefly acknowledged once by the character of Annabeth before they go onto a battlefield, where they're categorized as like ancient blood memories of warfare skills, which in the context like also categorizes them as something as more of an advantage as something like as opposed to something like a hindrance. And if you stretch the reasoning for why it's only mentioned in this one instance, it could be a comment on how infrequently these sorts of disorders are actually talked about. I found that the symptoms of Percy's actual disorders take some center stage, whether it's his intrusive thoughts during a song or just like a general disposition of restlessness, an exaggerated sense of confusion across the board. Essentially, I think they're reflected in a more positive light in this production.
Great, yeah. So in the show, he has ADD and dyslexia. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That it's not mentioned much, and it's also not mentioned much in the real world either. I mean, especially way back in my day, like 50 million years ago, when I went to school. I probably had friends that would have been diagnosed with different things, but those just really didn't exist in the vocabulary of regular people. So can one of the experts speak on why these learning disabilities aren't spoken about much and what we might be able to do about it to get it more into the conversation?
I'm happy to speak to Alice, Dr. Stout.
We both have different views, so go ahead.
Okay,
Great.
so I would say that as I love that the dyslexia is being talked about because I do serve a lot of students or support a lot of families where dyslexia is an issue. And I would venture to say there are a few reasons why it's maybe not talked about or diagnosed. Dyslexia is an invisible disability. And so often, parents and teachers recognize that a student or a person is smart. You're smart, just try harder. If you just try to read, try to write, practice more. Whereas when we identify dyslexia and we can give the accommodations of audiobooks or speech to text, then that student or that person can understand, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. I just process differently. And dyslexia is something that causes a lot of anxiety because the person can hear and they can speak and they know what's going on and they can't get their thoughts to paper, or they can't read on the pages. And so they think there's something wrong with them. And the families know they're smart, so they say, try harder, you're smart. The teachers say, try harder, you're super smart. But until we diagnose and identify and then make it a superpower, like you have absolutely every opportunity to access the same level of education and you could be a novelist if you wanted to. If you use speech to text, you can access what your friends are reading if you listen to it. When we make it not a problem, like you were just saying, Dane, is when we make it an understanding and we have pride and self-advocacy, then it comes out of the shadows. But I think your question is why it's not talked about and diagnosed. And I think it's a misunderstanding. With all good intentions, teachers and parents say, try harder. And I think that's why it's less diagnosed. If we could just acknowledge that maybe reading is going to be an auditory task now. Writing is going to be speech to text now. That's my thought.
Okay,
Great.
and I would add that psychological diagnosis is challenging on a good day for any psychological disorder. It's easy to diagnose heart disease. It's hard to diagnose something that impacts the non-physical being or the soul. That given, there's a lot of stigma, and in certain communities in our county, people don't want to be associated with any disorder, and families will actually work against the school system to prevent that from being made on the record. And then one other thing that I've seen is that learning disorders can be impacted by motivation. So there are some kids that have a learning disorder, but they just have superhuman motivation. So they end up looking like a fairly normal kid, but they're working their fanny off to do that. And that takes a toll in other places, but it might be hard to see in the classroom, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree with that. And I would add that not only, yes, families push against having a label. Sometimes when a family wants help, the school district says, you don't want your child labeled. So then they're discouraged from, you don't want to be that. You don't want your kid to be that. And that stigma has to go away. I agree with you. I think it comes from both sides.
Great. So with these differences that the characters experience, and not just Percy Jackson, but a lot of the other characters have their own different challenges. How can one of the either Dane or May speak to how do the characters work through these differences and how does it affect them?
I can let you take that one.
Yeah. So it's really we see, as Dane was talking about earlier, how these learning disabilities are presented in a much more positive light, and they're shown as like something that is useful and has ability to it and gives some feeling of it's okay to feel this way. And we see but beyond that, we see that Percy's character excels a lot in learning to accept his differences. We see in the beginning of the show, he's very afraid of being different, and he has this kind of feeling of wanting to just be normal. And as he goes through this quest and he goes through this journey of learning that it's okay to be different and that there's power in being different. And we see a lot of the other characters go through similar things with their own situations, learning to accept the past and learning and accepting that we can't change what has happened, but we can only move on with where we are. We see the character of Grover going through that. We see the character of Annabeth trying to come to terms with her family and trying to come to terms with accepting her family, even if they're not so accepting of her.
Yeah, and all the characters have the one thing in common that, at least the main characters have the one thing in common that they have conflicts with their parents. Either they feel invisible, or they feel like they're not acknowledged for their talents and skills, or they're not valued and they're ignored. And on top of that, for a character like Percy who has these disabilities, like how does the family dynamic affect that? Does anyone want to speak to that?
You could definitely see a difference in terms of like the extent of support that the character is receiving from the parent. Like Percy has like all the support in the world from his mother. Granted, his dad isn't exactly in the picture for most of the show, but I think that was pretty crucial, especially in the song "Strong," where his mother is just bombarding him with support and love about anything to do with being like something next to normal. And
Yeah, the song is called "Strong," where he's trying to talk about that it's a weakness, but she's saying it's a strength, right?
Yes. I also wanted to touch on I think they work through the differences with each other. I think that's kind of that was my big takeaway. The trend in this musical is that like it takes people to perpetuate an idea, but it also takes people to like dismantle that same idea. So like through going through this entire journey, Percy is meeting a lot of new people that have different perspectives on the same thing. And that's really shifting how he feels about it, like over time, and eventually to his like self-realization almost moment in the song Son of Poseidon, where he finally comes to terms with his identity, because he's been, I guess, surrounded by that support system of people who accept that and actually see it as something cool or like advantageous and interesting. And I think that really takes a toll.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And how important it must be to have a support system if you don't have it at home, to have it at school or somewhere else, right? We had talked about how sometimes families don't want things diagnosed, sometimes the school districts. Are there any other reasons why learning disabilities aren't diagnosed, or any other foundational issues that restrict diagnosis?
Well, I alluded earlier that it can just be incredibly hard to diagnose.
Yeah.
Some things are really easy, easier to diagnose, depression or anxiety. But when it comes to neurological disorders and the types of things that can happen to a kid or can afflict their brain, it's almost limitless, and it's just really challenging to figure out exactly what's going on a good day.
And I would come from the other perspective at the school setting is that a lot of times they look at the grades. And so like Dr. Stout said a few minutes ago, some kids are just trying so hard, or families are getting tutors. And so the district says they're fine because look at their grades are C's. C's is average, that's fine. But
Yeah.
I've had kiddos who are extremely gifted and extremely dyslexic. And so there is a need, but they look at the grades. And so sometimes in the school district, it's the learning disability is missed because the grades are fine. And families don't want to let their kids fall on their face just to prove that they have a learning disability. So they're doing all this support behind the scenes, and the district doesn't see it, or they aren't willing to assess for it. There's standardized tests. There's ways to look at it and identify it, but sometimes it has to do with how hard they're paddling under the water. They're
Yeah.
up here, but they're working so hard paddling under the water and getting help at home. But the whole time they're getting all that extra help, there's that negative effect on their mental health and self-esteem, that there's something wrong with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then they don't want to admit that they're having to work so hard on this. They just want to show that they're fine. And also they don't want to be a burden to others.
There's also issues related to things like language. If the family isn't a native English speaker, that can be a challenge. Immigration status can be a challenge, because even walking into an IEP meeting at the school can be very scary for some people. And if they're working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, they don't have time for a meeting at the school anyway. So there, there's just multiple levels of challenge. Even if the services, if they're set up to provide them, getting a good psychological evaluation and history on a kid can also be challenging, because you can have the most competent mental health professional and everything right, and the kid, maybe they're just off that day. Maybe they had a bad day.
Yeah.
Maybe they're sick or they're tired. And sometimes what can typically be done in 3 or 4 hours might have to be done over the course of 4 different sessions for some kids, and it just gets tiring. And then when you're doing that every 3 years, it really just, there starts to be a cumulative effect.
Yeah, absolutely. I just thought of this too. There's probably parents who go into these meetings and they don't want to be labeled as a bad parent, especially if there's like a custody issue or something like that, and they don't want to be blamed for the learning disability and risk losing their kids. So I think there's so many reasons why these things don't get diagnosed, right? I have my own too, which we'll talk about later. But I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
No, I was going to say right. And, parenting issues, culture, some families I've represented have told me that they don't feel comfortable questioning the teacher because they were raised to think the teachers are always right. We aren't allowed.
Sure.
But in this country, there's a special ed law, and you have a right to disagree. You're a member of the team, but parents don't know they're a member of the team.
Yeah, so they never receive that information, right? Sometimes.
Right.
And it's also hard on the parents. It's really hard when when you have a kid, you have this vision about everything wonderful and rainbows and unicorns, and when you end up with a special needs kid, things are just different, and it doesn't frequently meet those dreams and expectations. And it's really hard as a parent to walk into a meeting and say, I need help, or my kid isn't cutting it. Because you go on social media and everybody's kid looks great and everybody's doing fine and you're not, and it's tough.
Yeah. Well, you see their highlight reels on social media, right? So then what are the long-term effects of growing up with undiagnosed learning disabilities, specifically on mental health? Well, how does it affect kids?
I'll share a couple things, and I'm sure Melinda's got some thoughts too. The foremost issue has to do with academic progress. When you're only getting 60% of the material in the 2nd grade, and then you're moving to the 3rd grade, 60%, 4th grade, you start to have this degradation of experience, and things just get worse. It's kind of like digging yourself into a hole. So from a life success or life trajectory point of view, it just gets harder each year. From a mental health perspective, there's a lot of research that talks about the importance of friends in a kiddo's life, and specifically, having that support group that was spoken about earlier. And frequently, these kids have a challenge around friends. Some of them, they all want friends. Some of them have behaviors that tend to push friends away. Some of them don't make the greatest choices in making friends. Some of them get involved in substance abuse to deal with all of the issues that are going on. And it really, all of those things have this synergistic effect that really impacts the trajectory of what's possible for them in the long run.
Yeah. Melinda, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would definitely say that the long-term effects of not being identified is low self-esteem, negative self-talk, thinking that there are limitations. If we're talking specifically about the dyslexia that you have in Percy Jackson, not knowing that you can create your written work with speech to text limits you in what you create, because you can't get it, from your brain through your hand on the pencil. Or not being able to read with dyslexia, maybe you don't access the same books where you could if you got help. If it was diagnosed and you got help, you could access the same literature as your same grade level peers. But like Dr. Stout said, year after year, the gap grows wider, and the removal from general education into special education happens, where then that limits the ability to go straight to a 4-year university. So, kids who have the special day class, parents here, you could go to college, but what they don't understand is you could only go to junior college. So if that student is an athlete, they can't even go, even if they get a scholarship to a four-year university, unless we identify it and we support them and we give them the access to their same grade level peers. And I would also say that I agree with Dr. Stout that our undiagnosed kids easily become victims because they want to be friends. They want to make friends. So they will do anything for people to like them, and they can be talked into doing things. And if they have a learning difference, depending on what it is, they may not understand the ramifications of what they're being asked to do. They're doing it to make friends so that the kids will like them. But I've had kids with learning differences who end up being the only one in trouble, because the kids who don't have learning differences know how to get out of there or talk their way out of it, whereas the kid with the learning difference is taken advantage of.
Yeah. So you feel like they're more vulnerable to peer pressure and things like that.
Absolutely. And I will say, maybe I don't know if you want this, but I know as a teacher that the statewide testing that's done, our state uses the third grade testing results to predict future beds in prison. Like it is used. The data from the statewide testing is used to predict how many beds we're going to need in the future. So that is a long-term negative effect of undiagnosed. Our prisons are full of undiagnosed learning differences, where they just thought there was something wrong with them, or they're stupid, or they went down the wrong path. And I hate that word that I just said, but yeah.
Yeah. So
I think Dane was going to add, and it looked like.
Go ahead, Dane.
I would love to touch base on just from an anecdotal perspective, I happen to be on the spectrum. I think if I were to define the feeling, I only got a proper diagnosis when I turned 20, and I'm still 20. I'm about to be 21, but that took a long time. And I think if I could describe my entire experience in one word, it'd be like isolation, like not a part of the pack. Just like there was some fundamental flaw that I could not control that was leading me to do all these things, that I was maybe some sort of like flawed individual. Like just, I think, and it took a while for me to, I think making friends, it's absurd how much of this I'm relating to, by the way. It's like absolutely absurd. My number one strategy for making friends in school was perform, be funny and witty, make some sort of performance. It's hilarious that I'm here right now. I think I had a lot of practice. It took me until my freshman year of high school when I met my best friend to this day, and May is the excellent exception, but he happens to have Asperger's as well. And it was ridiculous to meet someone who like I just immediately understood and immediately understood me. And he had been diagnosed when he was in like the third grade, and he had been medicated for all that time. And he was able to walk me through everything and totally like debunk the whole idea of like, you're just messed up for whatever reason. So that was like a gift from God to me. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I love that you shared that.
Yeah, and it was great because Dane took the courageous step of just letting the cast know, and there weren't any issues or anything, but he just let the cast know, and I think everyone appreciated that, that he would be able to be that vulnerable and to be able to share that with the rest of them. And I think it meant a lot to the younger kids because they're the adults. All the kids are younger. So I think that was a great role model for other kids who may be experiencing other things, that it's okay to speak up and say something. And also within the rehearsal process, I see that Dane and May have a really good bond and a way of talking to each other. So a lot of times May will set Dane aside and just kind of speak to him. And I think that's great that Dane has someone like May that can really help him through the process, especially a creative process like this. So I'm really grateful to both of them. And they're both really great role models for the kids, especially when May yells at them to be quiet all the time.
Well, if I may share, in my work, one of my biggest focuses is self-advocacy. And so both of you, Dane and May, speaking up and saying, hey, I'm here, I belong here, and this is something about me, and there's nothing wrong with it. This is just who I am. Whether it's a learning difference, dyslexia, being on the spectrum, having hearing loss, whatever it is, I strive to have every student that I work with be loud and proud, top of the mountain, I belong here, and I need this one little accommodation or whatever it might be.
Yeah, Dane's accommodation is he requires a non-fat cappuccino every rehearsal. It's weird. Just kidding. Can I ask though, Dane, how did you eventually, if you don't mind answering, how did you eventually get around to getting diagnosed? Or did someone just find you and mention it to you? Did you seek help?
I think too many, just getting like more educated, too many symptoms lined up. And that was something I'm kind of still in denial about it, to be real. It's something like I still have that almost internalized stigmas of I don't want to be like that person. And that's pretty terrible. So I to be honest, when I finally had the initiative to look into it was I used to make these videos on YouTube, and one of them happened to get a lot of attention. They're like programming videos. It was, I think it's bordering on like 1 million views or something. And I remember a comment that was like, this is definitely an autistic project. And I was like, that's pretty degrading. And this was at the time I wasn't diagnosed. I didn't even like suspect that yet. And then I sort of like kind of looked into it, and a lot of comments were like, how could someone even think of that, of doing this? Or like, how could you like, this is, so then I was like, that kind of hit pretty hard. So I decided to like look into it a little more, and I finally met with a psychiatrist, and he told me that he takes a long time to give out these diagnoses. So I really had to state my case because I was a 20-year-old man, and I had to. So I spent an hour just writing down a lot of my experiences, and I went through these bullet points, I listed them all out, and I described each of them. And at the end, he was like, I essentially have no choice but to diagnose you with autism spectrum disorder. So, and that was, yeah, that hit me like a train. And that's something that that was only like, gosh, like not even 6-7 months ago. I'm pretty bad with time, so that could be off. But yeah, still realizing a lot of new things lately. Yeah, that's, so maybe not the best way of figuring out eventually, but it happened, and a lot of positive things I think are coming out of it.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Go ahead, doctor.
I will share. I have a special needs daughter who's on the spectrum as well, and it took a team of very astute psychologists and occupational therapists and speech and language therapists and developmental pediatricians and school consultants. It took a whole team of people 3 years to come up with the diagnosis, and these were people that were actually trying.
Yeah.
You know, because she doesn't have a typical presentation, as most kids don't. And yeah, so it can take time.
I was very blessed to have my psychiatrist, Dr. Francis Shee, absolutely exceptional. Yeah, super lucky to have him. Like, he's the best. So
That's great.
I'm grateful.
Good. It's good to have good health professionals on your side.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, I was talking to a therapist once, and they just said, you know, you look like you have the symptoms of severe ADD. So I didn't know until I was into my 40s. So you know, I haven't paid attention to the last 20 minutes of this conversation. So I'm just kidding. But I find that a lot of times I have to, if I'm listening to a podcast or an audiobook, I have to like rewind it like 15 times, a lot of times before I get to like, oh, my mind wandered, you know, I miss freeway exits and stuff like that. And so it all kind of makes sense when they told me that.
You know, it's interesting, Joe, when I went into the field of psychology 30 years ago, the predominant thinking at the time was that ADD was something you just grew out of. And no one ever talked in grad school really at the beginning about anybody over the age of 18. And today we recognize that you're going to have that some people do grow out of it, or their maturity makes up for enough of it that you can't tell. But a lot of people do struggle with it for a long time, and it's not uncommon to be diagnosed in your 40s.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the psychology community has come a long way on this one.
Yeah, good. And I'm so glad for that.
Me too.
Um, what do you guys say to, I feel like a lot of teenagers or kids, like some of my like daughter's friends, if they're like an introvert or something, they say, oh, I have social anxiety. I feel like there's a lot of overuse of self-diagnosis for a lot of different things. Um, do you feel like that's an issue or a problem, or is it better to err on the side of caution and be self-aware about those things? What do you think about that? Or have you noticed that at all?
Oh yeah. For me, it's a two-edged sword. On one hand, I am very pleased that we talk about it more out in open. The schools are really doing a better job than ever in getting young people talking about mental illness and educational issues. That's a really good thing. The flip side to that is there are a lot of people in not only our schools and young people, but in our society as a whole, that's very casual about psychological diagnoses and throw these terms around, and they don't really know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
We see it in a school sometimes. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen is that the school does a seminar for the teachers, a half-day seminar, and the teachers all walk out of there, and it almost becomes like a witch hunt. For the next 6 weeks, they're trying to diagnose all these kids. They're not even qualified to diagnose anyone. But yeah, I mean, it's good, but there are some challenges around that as well.
Absolutely. Melinda, do you have anything to add to that, or?
I agree. I think that it is wonderful that we're eliminating the stigma and we're talking about it. We're identifying it. We're supporting. We have counseling in school.
Mhm.
If the school counselors don't work, there's another level of mental health services that the district can offer. And I think, like Dr. Stout said, the flip side of the coin is just throwing it around there. Oh, I have depression, I have anxiety, because these terms are out there now. But I would rather err on the side of
Caution.
Yeah, and not hiding it, not saying, oh, you don't, you're fine, suck it up. I would much rather err on, okay, so let's deal with that, let's address it, let's get you help, let's talk, rather than no, you don't.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to move on to how parents can advocate for their kids to be tested and receive accommodations. But I wanted to talk briefly about my daughter's situation. She has auditory processing disorder. While it's not a learning disorder, she is almost deaf in one ear. And so when she goes to the movies, she has to wear those cute glasses with the closed captioning. And now we've gotten used to watching closed captioning on TV. So even if I'm by myself, I turn the closed captioning on. It really helps. and she has to read lips. So the pandemic was hard because everyone wore masks. And they tried to get like the teachers to wear clear masks, but then they would just fog up.
Yep, right.
She has her friends that help her. She gets grouped with her friends that help her. But in terms of accommodations, what's frustrating is that she is fine. She gets along great. She has a 4.1 GPA. She got into her dream college. She's getting scholarships from other colleges that she's going to turn down. That's like killing me because she wants to go to her dream college. But I feel like it's the teachers saying, oh, she's fine. She's doing great. She's a trooper. Like you said, doctor, she has to work her fanny off to get to the same place that other kids don't. And a lot of times she just misses things. And I think then we never know because she doesn't want to speak up. She doesn't want to be a burden to the teachers or anything like that. And it's harder to advocate when it's not so obvious, like the things that, especially with mental health, learning disabilities, you can't see them, they're not in a wheelchair, you can't see
Right.
The disabilities. So it's easier for teachers to say, oh, they're fine. Oh, they're getting along great. And so in that respect, in instances like mine, what advice can you give to parents to advocate for their kids or to have the kids advocate for themselves? Even if they are quote unquote fine and doing well, they have the right to have the same access as everyone else and shouldn't have to spend their whole life treading water, like you said, just to stay on the same level as others. So, what advice can you give to parents and students on that respect?
It's really important to get educated. I mean, I'll tell you, as a parent myself, I sat in IEP meetings. I listened to the teachers. I watched my daughter. They give every parent, if you make it to an IEP meeting, they give you your booklet, a booklet of parental rights, and everybody brings it home and throws it in a pile, and you sign a form, but you don't read it. And you don't understand it if you do read it. And we heard a lot of no, 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 no. We don't do this. We don't do that. We don't do this. And then someone said to us, well, you need to hire an educational consultant like Melinda. And so we did that, and it was the same room, same meeting, same teachers, same district people, same parents, same kid, but it went from no, no, no to yes, 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 because this consultant was in the room challenging them every step of the way. And, you know, the bottom line, and Melinda can talk about this all day, I'm sure, but the parents have rights. You have the right to go into the office and give them a letter saying, I want my kid tested. And the district has to do it. Not only they have to do it, but they have to do it in a certain time frame that's really tight. And parents have a lot more rights than they think they do. And because of that, every district in America has an employee at the district level whose sole job it is to track paperwork and timelines for special needs cases that are working their way through the process to ensure that kids can get their needs met. And for me, it was all predicated upon, I should have read that book in the beginning, that booklet, or I could have understood it, because, you know, here 30 years of college education between my wife and we didn't know we had the right to have someone come into the meeting with us. We didn't know we had the right to challenge them and say, we disagree with your outcome. We didn't know we had the right to ask for an external reviewer. You know, and we're professionals in this field, and we didn't know that. So how, you know, I walked away. Talk about mental health. I mean, it was an existential crisis for me, because I felt awful thinking, well, what if I was an immigrant parent that didn't have the money to pay a consultant or, you know, all those other challenges. You know, for us, it ended up kind of being a pay to play situation. But I guess where I'm going with that is that it's imperative that people know their rights. Do a little bit of research, know your rights, get that booklet from the district and read it from cover to cover 4 times if you have to, so you understand what your rights are. And if you can, then you hire someone like Melinda.
Yeah.
I would say, yeah, what Dr. Stout said, number one, to answer your question of how parents get their kids tested or identified. And first of all, let me just back up to your daughter. I've represented a lot of kids with auditory processing disorder, and it is an invisible disorder. And so many teachers think they're fine, especially if they have normal hearing. She's fine, she heard me. She's fine, she heard me. But auditory processing disorder, you have typical hearing and you can't process. The 2 hemispheres of the brain don't communicate with each other. It's an invisible disability. And so there's so much low self-esteem, depression. What's wrong with me? I heard them. My friends heard them. They're all working. I can't work. I don't remember. Sometimes they rely on 1 or 2 friends, like you said about your daughter. Maybe those friends kind of get sick of it. And then there's little social issues going on. There's so much that goes on specifically with auditory processing disorder, and districts not understanding it. But to answer your question about how parents can get help, number one, like Dr. Stout said, put it in writing. Because the law is a federal law, and once you put it in writing, the timelines kick in. If families are asking, their teacher loves them, they love their teacher, they're verbally having conversations, no timeline has started. So number one, put it in writing. When you put it in writing, they must give you an assessment plan. They must assess the child. They must look at it. Even if they come to the meeting and say no, they have to assess. They can't predetermine. We're not going to assess because this doesn't exist, which sometimes families get told. No. And number 2 is understanding that you're an equal member of the team. And here's the big one: understanding you can say no to the no. You have a right to agree or disagree in part or in whole. And there's a next level. It's already built in. There's next steps. But like Dr. Stout was saying, families who don't know, no matter how much education you have, no matter what language you speak, if you don't know that you can say no to the no, if you don't know the always, we have to, we can't, we never, that's not what it's about. It's about your individual child's needs. And then I would say bring support. Dr. Stout said, read the rights. Look, I got a master's degree in special education, and that rights book is
It's awful.
Convoluted. So someone with you, whether it's an advocate, a family member, a neighbor, your best friend, Dane and May, somebody who knows how you're feeling when you walk in and what you plan to say, because whether it's going well or it's going bad, your brain floods with emotion, positive emotion or negative emotion, and you leave the meeting and you go, wait, what did they say? So always bring someone with you, even if it's just moral support. And I would say the last thing, which I isn't how can you get districts to assess, but I would say never sign anything in the moment. Read it first.
Yeah.
Don't
That's
ever
great advice. Yeah, absolutely. So Dane was talking about, suspecting that he had, learning that he had about his diagnosis. What do you say for adults who think they might have an undiagnosed learning disability or difference, and what steps could they take?
Well, you want to get in touch with a licensed mental health professional that can diagnose that. Most master's level therapists in California are not experts in this area. So I would recommend a psychologist, a doctoral level person that can actually do some psych testing and help get into the specifics of what you have. And that's really where you need to start, is to get a diagnosis.
I would agree. And then the next step is to, like Dane is processing right now, is this doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. That doesn't mean I'm like them. It's not a negative label. It's there's an answer now. And so there's what's called the Americans with Disabilities Act, and understanding that now I have an identified disability and I have a right to captions or, whatever accommodations you need. If you identify an auditory processing disorder or a learning difference, and you have a job where you need to have speech to text, or you're a nurse in the OR and you have to answer the phone, but you have hearing loss, you can get a captioned phone. As an adult, if you identify, oh my gosh, this is what's been going on with me all along, and I have these books I want to write, I can speech to text and someone else can edit it for me and I can be a #1 best-selling author. Just get it diagnosed. I agree with Dr. Stout. Learn about it. Don't feel bad, it sounds judgy, but learn about it. Learn your superpower, learn your accommodations. Don't be shy about asking for them.
Great.
And having done that myself, I'll say again, that is one of the most hardest phone calls ever to make, to pick up the phone and call a mental health professional as an adult and say, I need help. It's just it's really hard. So work up to it, be kind to yourself, but you got to make the call. It's really the only way you can get the ball going.
Well, I feel like the older someone gets, the harder it might be to make that call, right? Because they're like, oh, I should be fine. I should be okay, right?
It's embarrassing. There's so many layers there. What will my family think? What if my boss finds out? It's just, it's really, really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's important to do it, right?
Yes.
You were talking about superpowers. So what are some strengths that you've seen in individuals who've endured learning disabilities as they've grown up? Maybe they didn't get diagnosed right away, or maybe they got diagnosed early, but then they worked through it as they grew up. Have you seen any examples of some strengths that you've seen in individuals going through this process?
Oh, I have, yes. I think that when you have you have a diagnosis, you have the documentation, you have the accommodations, you work on self-advocacy. I have seen individuals who might have gone down the special education pathway, go not be in special education, not be in a separate special day class, because they got their accommodations, they could access their education, going to schools, Ivy League schools, if that's what they want, having the career they want. I remember a girl who the district wanted to dismiss her from her IEP because she's fine and she was smart,
Hmm.
still had the eligibility. So we kept her IEP, and she ended up, I mean, she's going to run the world someday. She understood the difference between the IDEA and the ADA. She understood her accommodations and how they helped her. She found the Office of Students with Disabilities at the college she wanted to go to. The limits, the chains are broken. The limits are gone. If you say, I can access that class, or I can access that job training. It doesn't have to be college. We're not here to say everyone has to go to college. I can access that job training program if they can give it to me on audio books, or I can have notes or extra time, or I can get my driver's license because I can tell the DMV that I have to have you read the test to me. Don't put me on the computer. Please read the test to me. I can get my driver's license. So I think knowing what's going on, embracing it, and advocating and not being embarrassed, I've seen just the opportunities are limitless, and the embarrassment goes away.
Yeah.
And to talk about the older adult, I have worked with adults who were in their 40s when they were first diagnosed. And my experience are they are incredibly hardworking people because they've had to work very hard to keep up with their peers. They're incredibly creative people because they've had to be creative to create workarounds in their lives to be successful. They're very resilient people. And it's kind of like when all the dust settles, they're like, wow, I never, a lot of them don't realize they've had to work so much harder. And, if they get on the right medication or get the right course of therapy and start learning about their strengths and weaknesses from the disorder, it really is an aha experience for them. And things can get easier for them in some ways.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Dane or May, do you guys want to talk about how it's going now, and if you had any advice based on what you've been going through, just from your experiences, what advice might you give to someone maybe that's a little bit younger, that's going through something similar to what you have gone through?
That's really a tough one. It's a very complicated thing, but I feel like if I could say anything, and please correct anything here, but from a personal perspective, like if you're reflecting, being introspective about it, be as objective as possible for your experiences. That's a very difficult thing because a lot of this is very subjective, but there are things that can be pinpointed, and then talk to a professional. Because I think the thing that I was most afraid of was the whole self-diagnosis thing. And because I saw that everywhere. And when I was trying to talk to people about going through and getting the diagnosis, a lot of people would say, oh, me too. And I was like, oh, really? Like, how do you know that? And they're like, oh, I just know. There's no, and that was like a really kind of a painful thing to hear, because it's like, oh man, I'm really just like, it almost felt like I was not going to be taken seriously. That's, yeah. So, yeah, be as objective as possible and talk to a professional. Maybe the professional first.
Yeah.
Yeah. May, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, for me, I was diagnosed. I have ADHD. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was in 5th grade, so I was 11 years old at the time. So I have the benefit of that I've had this diagnosis for a while, and I've been able to find the support necessary to get through it. But it's really just understanding on a personal level, like I would advise especially kids to stand up for themselves, learn about what it is that you're going through, and learn how that is personally affecting yourself. And then allow yourself to stand up for what you need. And it's obviously always just difficult to ask for help, but when you start asking for help at a younger age, you learn to accept asking for help as you grow. And so learning how to ask for help when you're younger and when you're first starting to understand what these things are that you're feeling, that will really help as you grow in learning how to continue asking for help and learning how to ask for help in the more nuanced parts of your life or in any learning disabilities or neurodivergencies that are going on.
Great. What do you say to people who go and ask for help and the diagnosis is, oh, you don't have a learning disability? Do you suggest they get a second opinion, or what do you feel like they should do?
I would say absolutely get a second opinion. People tend to feel like they have to stick with the first person they call. And, in my field, we have a saying, fit happens, FIT. If you don't have a good fit with your first mental health professional, maybe it will come with the second or third. And they all have different theoretical orientations. Those are approaches to psychology. They also all have strengths in different areas. So it's possible you meet a great therapist that you like, but they don't have a strength in your area of need. So they're going to have some challenges in diagnosing you. And, it may take more than one person. But I like what was just said, though, because there's so much information available today in terms of research. You can go on Google and get wonderful. There's all kinds of really good information there in the mental health realm that you can use to self-educate. But yes, definitely second opinion, very important.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I would absolutely get a second opinion and trust your gut. In the educational realm, I always say parents, you're the parents, trust your gut. You're the expert on your kid. If you're a young adult or you're an adult and looking at maybe I have a learning difference, and maybe there's been something I've been trying so hard my whole life and this doesn't feel right, and get a second opinion. Don't take that no, oh, I guess I don't. There must be something wrong with me. I just didn't try hard enough. Trust your gut, get the second opinion and keep working on it. And I think that as hard as it is to get that answer as an adult, it's an answer. Okay, now I know. Now let's move forward. It's not just this unknown, what's wrong with me. And so whether someone finds out they're bipolar, on the spectrum, ADHD, dyslexic, like, oh my gosh, I've been trying so hard. Now I have an answer. Now I can figure out how to work around and get the accommodations I need.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said that there's a lot of resources out there. Can you share some resources for people who might be listening to this or watching this, looking for help? Where are some places locally that they can go, or even not locally?
Well, I'll share some Orange County resources. We have a wonderful coalition. I'm a new coalition. I'm on their advisory board. It's called OC Connect, and it's specifically for TAE youth and mental health issues in our county. Great organization. Orange County NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, has wonderful programs. We have an excellent Orange County Mental Health Association, wonderful programs. Not always in the educational realm, but I mean, they've got lots of resources. OC Prevention, we have a prevention network in our county that's over 30 years old that has all kinds of services way beyond just the specific scope that we're talking about here. And on my own website, drsconsulting.org, we have several pages related to help in terms of resources. We have a low and no cost mental health counseling page where we list every community mental health counseling center in the county. They can see you for $5 a session if you want to see a therapist, and they're in your community. And so lots of resources on that website as well.
Great. Melinda?
So I'm not local to Orange County, but I will say resources, no matter what school district you're in, wherever you are, you have the resource of your local school district. Start there. I would say if you're looking at someone's school age, they haven't graduated yet, start there, because if you spend your money on a private assessment, then you take it to the school district, they don't have to listen. But if you start with writing a letter to your local school district, documenting the suspected needs and asking for that assessment, that's your first step in resources. Then know that if you don't agree with that assessment, then you ask for the independent assessment at the district expense, like Dr. Stout was talking about. There are wonderful independent psychologists who will do psychoeducational testing, independent audiologists, independent occupational therapists. I would also say the regional center is a resource if there's a suspected need of being on the spectrum or any cognitive delays. Regional Center is a resource. And then I can give you my website if you like.
Yeah.
So I can put it in the chat or say it now.
I'll just say it because I think in Facebook they won't have access to the chat.
Oh, sure. It's MG AND Consultants, mgandconsultants.com. And so we have resources there. And then if there's a suspected possible hearing loss, I would look at UCLA, UC Irvine, Project Talk in San Diego County, and USC for pediatrics. Those would be where I would go if there's a possible learning disability, hearing disability, or auditory processing disorder. I would start with your audiology testing.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Resources.
Yeah, absolutely.
One more thing. No matter, test the hearing, because there's a lot of kiddos out there who are inappropriately diagnosed with language delays or autism spectrum disorder when they haven't checked the hearing. So always make sure hearing that they have access before you expect them to develop speech and language and behaviors, because what could look like a behavioral choice could be a lack of access to language.
Yeah, that's how we discovered my daughter's, because it was the way she spoke. She kind of talks like she has a jawbreaker in her mouth and kind of doesn't say a lot of syllables. And a lot of people are like, oh, are you French? But then we discovered it was her hearing. So thank you. That is very helpful. I wrote all of these down as you said them. And for the people who find this online, this will be very helpful to everybody. So thank you for your time, you guys. Is there anything else anyone wanted to add before we say goodbye?
I want to thank Laguna Playhouse for the wonderful work you do in the community and for having these types of discussions following your plays and providing resources for people. Your plays are always very thought-provoking, and there's research behind what you're doing in terms of giving people an opportunity to think about it further after the curtain comes down. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think art combines with science in helping to combat these things, and it's so valuable, especially helping people like Dane and May being able to have an outlet, and also people watching things like this being able to relate to characters on stage or even look at a painting or something. It's just such a great way to be able to get those abstract feelings out or to understand the world in a different way.
Well, I would like to thank Dane and May for participating and being open today and open and honest and sharing everything that you shared. That was really inspirational to me. And Joe for admitting that, you may have zoned out for 20 minutes. So
yeah. Who are you guys? I don't know. All right. Well, if that is it, thank you so much. Please keep in touch. Let us know what you're all up to. We'll be in touch through all these organizations that we work with. We work closely with NAMI and OC Connect and all these people. And so thank you so much for your time and for the great work that you're all doing. And Dane and May, thank you for your time. We're about to start a rehearsal, so we'll be working. And so thank you so much. And we're signing off. Thanks a lot, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It was great to meet everyone.
All right. Take care.